Surprise! Donald Trump.
Yeah. That makes sense.
That's right. The first former president to stand trial and be convicted in a criminal case. The New York jury found him guilty on all 34 counts in the hush money case. He could face up to 4 years in prison, but that'll be up to the judge. And the sentencing is set for July. He was found guilty of falsifying records before the 2016 election to hide payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Trump expected to appeal, although that proceeding will not likely reach a court before the November election.
Shortly after the verdict came down, this is what the former president had to say right outside the courtroom.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA. And the whole thing, we didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now.
Then a little bit later, DA Alvin Bragg came out and said this.
While this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor.
The political reaction has been basically what you would expect. Democrats saying this was an example of nobody being above the law and this was justice being served. The Republican Party officials that have spoken out, and it's been just about all of them saying that this is lawfare and this was unfair from the beginning, and you had Democrats out to get Trump. The legal reaction, I think, has been much more interesting. It's been a little more mixed in terms of some of the nuances of this case. One thing that is certain is that the defense team is going to appeal this case. And then from there, it sounds like there are a couple of ways they can go. And we just talked to former state and federal prosecutor David Weinstein just a little while ago. We also talked to former New York City prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Paul Callan in the 6 o'clock hour. It's a number of different options they have there. And that leaves things in kind of a state of flux where in the meantime, I don't think the judge is going to sentence Trump to any kind of prison time when they have the sentencing hearing on July 11th. But even if he did, pending appeal, Trump's not going to be locked up anytime soon. And he's certainly obviously not going to jail in the meantime.
Well, he doesn't have priors.
He waits for sentencing.
Yeah, he doesn't have priors. And so he also, these are, nonviolent crimes.
Yeah.
So that could play into it. Now, his behavior outside the courtroom and the violating of the gag order, some legal experts have said that could be taken into consideration at the sentencing, because the judge didn't do anything during the case, even though he essentially admonished Trump and his team for doing that.
And what happens between now and then, the judge could take into consideration. We'll see what Trump says and does, including at 11 a.m. this morning. You'll hear that right here on NewsRadio WFLA when he speaks. But given all of that, I'd still find it extremely shocking if any kind of prison time were to come down for this. But we'll see. And then how this impacts the election, I think it's anybody's guess. I think in the short term right now, it certainly energizes the Republican Party, the MAGA base to a level we probably haven't seen since the indictment came down. I think we might see that reflected in the polling in the immediate aftermath. But
in donations, for sure.
In donations, shut down the website. Yeah. So more long term, I think the question is, does this have any kind of impact on swing voters, on independents, on those who maybe were Biden voters in 2020 and are leaning a little bit more Trump? Does this change that at all? I think that's the part to really hone in on, because that's what's going to be a factor in those key swing states that are likely going to be pretty close come Election Day.
Or will so many things happen between now and the election that people won't even remember this?
It's another possibility. You're right.
Yeah, we're so far out from the election. But, one of the things that I haven't heard a lot of the analysts talk about is that, in 99% of these type cases, cases that are white-collar crimes,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is this, fudging the numbers on some documents, most of the time those are handled, you have wealthy business owners, they hire expensive attorneys, they go into the DA and they negotiate something to a lesser charge, they might even pay a fine, and they settle the case and move on.
Yeah.
Donald Trump chose to take this head on and deny everything, also almost to the point of absurdity. I mean, he tried to convince the jury that he had no relationship to Stormy Daniels.
Yeah, I didn't buy that.
That was absurd. He also tried to convince the jury that he didn't have a business relationship with Michael Cohen. That was all established fact before the trial.
The problem is you wouldn't have a deal being made just on the documents part, because if that was the central focus of this case, then you wouldn't have a case because the statute of limitations had run out on the falsifying of business records. That's what, again, makes this case so unique. And I think personally problematic is that in order to just bring the case in the first place, to make a case, there had to be the second part, the furtherance of another crime, which makes it a felony charge. Now, from there, could a deal have been worked out? I guess maybe.
I don't think Trump even tried.
No, and I honestly don't think he should have.
But Trump's
politically or legally.
But Trump's strategy in these legal cases has been a failure every time. I mean, he lost
How?
the case.
This is the only case that's come forward so far.
His company lost that case with the state attorney general for evading taxes. He lost 2 cases to E. Jean Carroll, civil cases. Now he's lost to the DA in New York. I mean, that's 0 for 4.
What's the common denominator among all those cases?
He refuses to negotiate.
Also, that they're in New York.
Well,
somewhat friendly territory for those who are bringing those cases.
Prosecutors and attorneys, they can't control where the crimes are committed. That's just the way it works. I mean, you're saying he would get a fair shake if he committed the crimes in rural Alabama, for instance? Should that be where the trial was held?
No, but like in this case, you could make the argument that Queens makes it a little fairer than Manhattan, where he got, I think, 14% of the vote. Because normally you don't want to bring politics into a jury and all of that, but you can't remove it in this case. It's a former president.
Well, wait a minute. Does the defense attorney have the right to strike jurors who they think are going to be biased against Trump in the case?
Only a certain number of them.
Okay, so you're saying there's no way to get a fair trial if it's committed in Manhattan?
In this instance,
Trump should commit
I don't think so.
He should commit his crimes in Alabama instead. He'll get a fair shake down there instead.
Well, no, but you could have had a change of venue. You don't have to commit the crime somewhere else. You could have a situation where the judge looks at it and says, you know what? Where we are, if we just shift this over a district, then there might be a little bit more of a fair setup here. That's what you're talking about.
I don't think you're hearing that from Governor DeSantis. He's saying New York State law is corrupt.
Well, I think New York State law is flawed, and I think it was clear in this case, because I just think that it just doesn't make sense to me that you have the falsifying of business records and the furtherance of the crime, and then you don't have to specify, you lay out a couple of different options and the jury can pick from them. Then they don't have to say which one they bought in on. I mean, come on, that's just common sense. That's like a hodgepodge of nonsense.
I guess, but there are plenty of cases in New York that go on trial, and there are plenty of attorneys who are experts on this. Trump had every opportunity to hire the best attorneys. I don't think these guys did him
I don't think they were great. I don't think
they were terrible.
I don't think they really would have mattered.
They were terrible.
All that much.
Arguing these things about Stormy Daniels in the case, putting that Robert Costello guy
that
on
was
the stand,
a mistake. But
that did nothing but disrupt the trial, probably annoy the jury, and anger the judge.
No, I agree about that part.
Well at all.
They did pick apart Michael Cohen pretty good, and they had a lot of rulings go against them too, and that's going to be brought up on appeal as well. But I just think this type of case, first of all, would never been brought if it wasn't Donald Trump. Period. I mean, Alvin Bragg doesn't bring this case if it's not Donald Trump. So I feel like politics is right in the middle of it. And then just the setup. We had Paul Callan, who's a former New York City prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, and he literally said to us earlier, and Paul's a fair guy. He's like, this is hard to explain to you the case on the radio, all the legalese and everything.
Well, but did Trump commit crimes or not?
Well, that's not the question, though, because
it's not
the falsification of business records, which is what kicks this whole thing off, that ran out of the statute of limitations. So you can't bring a case on that. That's why they had to go for the extra part. And then you're telling me the extra part, we can just say, maybe it was.
We think he did it because
maybe
we don't
it was
like him.
campaign finance violation, even though the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, didn't bring a case against Trump. The prior Manhattan DA didn't bring a case against Trump. The Department of Justice didn't bring a case against Trump on that. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's a tax law. Maybe it's something else.
Well, no, the Department of Justice is federal. This is a state law. So that wouldn't have been the case.
No, not necessarily. There were three parts of it, and one part of it is the federal election violation, and the federal election violation always trumps a state election violation, period.
I think, though, you can make the argument that if this had an impact on the presidential election in 2016, it was fair to bring the case. The other thing is, if Trump's plan is to go to the appeals court and complain about how New York State does its legal proceedings and how they determine whether jurors are picked in Manhattan or not, he's going to lose. You can't go in and complain about the system. You have to complain about the case. I think
he'll lose on the jurisdiction, even though I, again, don't think it was fair, and I think it would have been right to have moved it out of Manhattan. I don't think he'll necessarily lose in terms of how New York law is set up, and this, again, furtherance of another crime and the options that the jury was given, how that was all done with the jury instructions. I think there is obviously something there. Legal analysts left and right have been saying that over the past 24 hours. So we'll see.
Trump is right about one thing. He said that this will be decided in November.
Yeah.
If he gets elected, none of this really matters.
Exactly.